Hello everyone, Storm here, and today I'll be giving my review of all 6 episodes of the new series Tales of the Walking Dead. I was meant to release this video a lot closer to the actual release of the final episode, but the audio that I had got lost, so I had to re-record it. But this show is an anthology showing us a new story each episode set in various points in the world of The Walking Dead. I watched each episode week to week and decided to make notes for each one to compile into a video for you guys, so you can all see my thoughts. But I do encourage you to go watch it yourself, as this video will not shy away from spoilers at all. So let's begin with episode 1. The first episode is Evie/Joe. Its main focus is on Joe, with Evie serving as a deuteragonist. Joe is shown to be the guy who spent his whole life in a bunker to prepare for the apocalypse, which is actually cool to see in The Walking Dead. He also works out, has electricity so he can watch football, and makes cool traps outside. He's also played by Terry Crews, which is neat, as I kinda like his energy in this episode. Joe's only problem is that he's lonely, and his only real friend is his dog, but his dog dies just 3 minutes into the episode, causing him to go on his motorcycle to go find this girl he met online before the apocalypse. Now, this isn't a bad starting point, but I do wish it was fleshed out a bit more. They tried to show the misery Joe was going through after his dog died, but it just didn't really hit for me due to how quickly it happened and how fast he goes out. Like, within the first 7 minutes, Joe is already off on his motorcycle. Shortly after he begins his journey, Joe is met by a girl named Evie, who catches him in a net and has him as a prisoner. She wants his bike, but she doesn't really know how to work it, so she has Joe drive while she sits in the other seat with a gun aimed at him. We see the two bond over time, and there is a classic dynamic between them that I noticed. As I described before, Joe is the big dude who works out, loves football, rides a motorcycle, etc. This is juxtaposed with Evie thinking the universe is beautiful, having good luck charms, protecting animals, and all that kind of stuff. So they basically took an astrology girl and a football guy and put them as a duo, which I thought was kind of boring at the start, but it grew on me a bit toward the end. They end up liking each other until some dude steals their bike and leaves a lamb behind, which is weird, but okay. Joe wants to stop the guy, so he uses Evie's gun to shoot him, but it's not loaded, which I think is pretty neat for Evie's character, as she doesn't really want to hurt anyone. And it means the gun she's been aiming at Joe this whole time was empty, and she was never really gonna do anything. The two have a falling out after being stuck on foot, and Joe goes alone. He finds out that the girl he talked to online actually lives a lot closer than he thought, so he enters her bunker. Her name is Sandra, and she seems really nice, but the brownie she gave Joe turns out to be an edible, causing him to trip out. She tortures him because she thinks he's probably trying to take her place like people did before. She tries to stab him in the chest, but the charm Evie gave to him is apparently super strong and reflects the knife, which I don't think they work that way, but okay. Joe then begins running away, and Sandra chases after him, and it's just really funny. She's this insane lady with crazy makeup chasing after Joe with a knife. It was just super wacky and fun to watch. Evie eventually shows up, and Sandra tries to feed her an edible, but Evie's able to notice after one bite since she's into that stuff, and it doesn't really affect her. The two fight, Evie frees Joe, and they throw a knife into Sandra's chest before escaping. Joe has now realized that finding Evie might have been the best thing for him, and the two go off together. So yeah, basically what I just described is The Walking Dead made an episode about e-dating. So, yeah. Now, my thoughts on episode 1 are that it's kind of funny and cute in some aspects, but it's just not what I'm looking for with The Walking Dead. It feels like more of a live-action comedy you'd see Ryan Reynolds or Mark Wahlberg in. Right from the first 4 minutes, I could tell the anthology style was hurting this episode due to the very fast pacing. It looks very pretty with some amazing shots though, so overall I'd give this episode probably like a 3 out of 10. Let's move on to the next. Episode 2 is titled Blair/Gina, with a much more balanced amount of development and screen time for the titular characters. And man, I just want to say that this episode is actually insane. At first, I thought it was going to be like the first episode, but my expectations were completely subverted. The writers for the show did something that is way out there, and it worked so well. I'm dancing around the point because I know people will watch reviews before they watch the actual shows or movies the person making the video is talking about. But when I say you need to experience this for yourself, I absolutely mean it. Please go watch this episode and then come back. Alright, so now that we've all watched the episode, right guys, I can get into what happens. So, it starts off in Atlanta at the very start of the apocalypse. A manager named Blair just being super annoying. The receptionist at her desk, Gina, just stays silent as Blair gives her orders and then dips. The tone at first feels like the same stuff as the first episode, being all jokey and stuff, until Blair stops at a gas station. There she sees Gina, who just saw a dead guy with a bite in his neck. Gina grabs a shotgun out of her trunk and tries to steal an oil truck to make it out of the city, which is very far escalating from what we just had. However, a Homeland Security agent steps out and tries to stop her. The whole time, Blair is just being a prick to Gina, who just left her desk to get a snack due to the broken vending machine. Anyway, the oil tank gets shot by Gina accidentally, and an explosion happens that kills everyone there. And that's the end of the episode. But then, Blair reawakens right where the episode started. It completely threw me for a loop, but I expected that it was just going to be a dream sequence or something. But no, Blair goes into the gas station, and Gina notices that things are repeating as well. The oil tanker blows up again, although some changes do happen because they're both confused. The two wake up at the beginning yet again, and know something's gone wrong. You get the picture. Gina decides to stand up to Blair for the first time, telling her that the way she lives is horrible and that she doesn't really care about anyone. Because of this, Blair decides to call the police before Gina arrives at the gas station, and they attempt to arrest her before she steals the tanker. But the two end up fighting, which leads to chaos and another explosion, sending them back. We get a montage of the different endings they get, and it's honestly really funny and just very out there. After the third death, they just start talking to each other like no one else exists and they all know what's going on, going over everything that happens in the future. It's incredibly fun to watch. Gina and Blair eventually realize that they have to let each other go, and they open up a lot. It's really cool seeing these two characters who hated each other so much grow and develop over the course of this episode. Their characters have a great dynamic and are honestly super realistic despite all the shenanigans. Not to mention, the acting is amazing this episode. I don't think it would have been nearly as good if these two actors weren't insanely talented. Anyway, Blair lets Gina steal the oil tank, forcing her employees to leave the office so that they can be safe. Her fiancé enters, as she was meant to meet with him a while ago, as she does in all the previous versions. But she realizes that during all those times, he never really tried to help her at all. So she dumps him, saying that, "Oh, you never got 2 feet out of your car to save me." And he's just super confused the whole time, because why wouldn't he be? But it makes perfect sense, like why she would dump him for that. Blair then finds some walkers and accepts her fate, only for her and Gina to wake up at the beginning once again. Gina says that she never made it out of the city, and they realize that they've got to work together one last time. So they steal the oil tanker together and crash into some police cars until they find a road below where a bunch of walkers approach. They decide to dump the oil and light something to set them all on fire, which is a really awesome nod to Telltale's The Walking Dead, where something very similar happens. And the oil tanker explodes, and the two survive. Gina then goes on a rant about how it all must be Blair's delusion and that it somehow spread to her because at the beginning she was studying that kind of thing in her office. But in the end, the two join up and go to find Gina's brothers and nieces. So how did I feel about this episode? It's absolutely fantastic. As I said before, it threw me for a loop completely. And while I can tell people aren't gonna like the supernatural stuff because they want The Walking Dead to be super realistic, I think it was just a very ballsy move by the writers. And also just very unique and made for a great story which is completely standalone, so if you hate the fact that they went this route, you can just ignore it from the canon. Very smart choice. In addition to a great story, we got great characters who had a great dynamic and great realistic dialogue and amazing acting. And the comedy is far better than the previous episode too. I would honestly love to see these two characters again. I don't care if they return in season 2, get their own episode, or have their own webisode series, or even if they somehow get a TV show, though I know that's not going to happen because everybody is going to hate this episode, I can already tell. But if they do return for another show, I would actually be down for it. I want the writers to be the same as well if they show up again in this show or get their own, because man, they nailed it on this one. 10 out of 10 episode. The third episode is the first one to have an already existing character from the shows. Its title is D. Now you might be wondering, what's D? And the answer to that is, D's not. But you guys might know her as Alpha. I think giving Alpha her own standalone episode is a great idea, as I loved her character in the show. And she doesn't join the show until season 9, so there's plenty of room for a story there. Not to mention what we do see of her backstory in the show is awesome as well, so let's go ahead and just get into my review of this episode. So what can I say about this episode other than I knew? I absolutely loved Alpha in the show, as I already said, and this episode was amazing for her and Lydia's character. It also gives us a nice look at how Dee reacts to other people trying to influence Lydia, and I like how this is probably the last time Dee is at least somewhat genuine and trying to be a good mother. Basically, Dee and Lydia are on a ship with a bunch of survivors. There's some murder mystery stuff. The leader, Brooke, tries to grow a bond with Lydia. She thinks that Dee is too harsh and there's probably something sinister happening. And we know that she's right because we've seen Alpha in the main show. Lydia and Dee have some conflict in this episode because of what Brooke is teaching Lydia, and that makes for great foreshadowing of their split to come later in the show. Dee's suspicions come true when one of their own betrays them and starts gunning down members of their group to take the ship. While Brooke is trying to reason, Dee just runs up and takes out one of the guys before escaping on a dinghy with Lydia. Everyone on the ship is killed besides Brooke, who they come across in a forest later. Dee comforts Lydia with her bunny and some earmuffs before going to take down Brooke for almost getting her daughter killed. However, Lydia jumps in the way and stops her. We then see Lydia singing the song that we know her parents sing to her in her backstory and in season 9, so that's really neat. Dee promises not to kill Brooke and instead just cuts her face to mark her with shame wherever she goes. Dee and Lydia go off together, and Dee tries to make Lydia kill some walkers, but she's too scared, so Dee kills them in a pretty cool way. She then comforts Lydia before almost taking both of them out, knowing that Lydia won't make it and that she can't live without Lydia. But as she's just about to, she is approached by the Whisperers, who Lydia mentions as the sprites talking to her earlier in the forest. We see a girl with blonde hair leading the Whisperers, and it cuts to Alpha in a cave, saying that she would have ended herself and Lydia. But then she met this person, and the camera pans down to see the blonde hair of the Whisperer leader. And man, that is an awesome twist. All the backstory in the show set up Dee to be the creator of the Whisperers, so to subvert our expectations by having her be saved by them is amazing. Not to mention, the episode heavily implies that she killed the original leader and made the mask we see in the show out of her face, which is like, just brilliant. It's actually gold. I love this episode. It did everything it was meant to do and more. I'm so glad the characters we like in the main show were adapted well here, and I'd honestly love to see more of their backstory. Brooke is now alone and in shame of what happened, so you could totally have another episode about Alpha confronting Brooke again later. But now Brooke isn't the same nice woman as she was before due to what she lost and what Dee has done to her, making her a real big threat. Or you could just have another episode on Brooke, or have her appear in another person's episode as an antagonist. I'd just love to see more from these characters, as there's so much left to tell about them. So I'm going to give this episode about a 9 or a 10 out of 10, honestly. The fourth episode is titled Amy/Dr. Everett, and this one seems to take place about a decade after the apocalypse due to some statements made. It's the closest episode timeline-wise to the main show of The Walking Dead. This one sees Dr. Everett as a protagonist, with Amy serving as a close deuteragonist. The story is that Dr. Everett has been secluded from humanity for many years, spending his time studying the dead. However, things get a bit interesting when he is forced to save a woman named Amy in order to protect his research. So with that setup, let's go ahead and talk about my thoughts. I really like Dr. Everett's character, where he's basically completely dependent on science and learning things about the world. It's something we haven't seen too much of in The Walking Dead, and would usually be used for an antagonist. I mean, not wanting to intervene to save human life and being obsessed with science sounds like an obvious villain trope, but they used it on the protagonist, which I like a lot. Amy's dynamic with Dr. Everett is also really good for both of their characters, as you can see Dr. Everett doesn't really care for her, but over the course of the episode he grows to care about her a great deal, and you can see him gradually change. Amy is meant to be the pure-hearted person who shows the old, lonely, stubborn man how to feel again and free him from the sad life he knows, and that's perfect, honestly. The way they spin things toward the end of the episode is genius, but first I want to talk about just how gorgeous this episode is. Using the drone to have brighter colors and show the beauty in the apocalyptic world is honestly really nice. Besides the first episode, this might be the best looking one so far. And I really appreciate how Dr. Everett doing research helped us learn about the walkers as well, and we can see that there's more to them than we normally think. Apparently certain walkers will kill prey and leave it for the rest of the herd, which is cool. There's also certain walkers that are more durable and stronger than others, which makes sense, and certain ones that can detect noises and prey before others. I mean, these things don't really break anything that we've seen so far, and it's just nice to learn that walkers can be unique. And plus, these might be the variant walkers that are introduced in other parts of the franchise, and because this takes place so much later in the timeline, maybe it actually makes sense why we haven't seen this that much. But even if that's not the case, it's still really cool. Anyway, as Dr. Everett and Amy bond more, we learn that Dr. Everett does have a heart. In fact, the walker he's been studying the most is revealed to have been his old friend, who he is continuing the work of. Now, as for negatives in the episode, I guess the acting for Amy was a little shaky at first, but got better after the first few scenes. I'm also not sure how Dr. Everett has the electricity or power needed to use a computer, some sort of tablet, and a drone. Maybe it's possible, but they never say anything about it, so I'm just a bit confused. But other than that, I really don't have any other complaints about this episode. The last thing I want to talk about is the ending, because it is stellar. Dr. Everett and Amy go off to find Amy's group, and they eventually find 2 people, but they're attacked by walkers. So Dr. Everett holds Amy back to let nature take its course. She's able to break free, but it's too late, and Dr. Everett realizes that one of the walkers was Subject 21, which is the one he's been looking for. It falls down a hill and into the water, and Dr. Everett goes after it, injuring himself in the process. He begs Amy to help him retrieve the walker, and she barely agrees. But as they're pulling it up to shore, it gets bitten by a crocodile and taken down, and Amy cuts the rope to save Dr. Everett. She calls him a hypocrite for not letting her save her friends, but trying to save the walker, and he is basically just left in misery now that he's lost everything. As Amy tries to leave, he tells her that a herd is going toward where her group's camp is, and even if she goes, she will most certainly die. He offered her early in the episode to join him and help him with the research, and he hopes that she will do that now to save herself. But Amy holds strong and refuses, going to warn her group of the impending threat. Dr. Everett watches her run on his drone before going back to his little shack. We see Amy arrive at the camp, and then Dr. Everett wakes up. You can tell he doesn't feel the same as he used to because of what has happened. He leaves his home, arriving in Amy's camp, only to see everyone there dead. He looks around until he finds Amy's walker, and he begins pulling out some sort of equipment to make her a new subject to study. And man, I love that ending so much. They could have easily done the predictable route of Dr. Everett going with Amy to her camp and living peacefully rejoining humanity, but they didn't. The other option I saw would be having Amy agree to not go back to her group and save herself by staying with him, which could have been cool as well. But I like the much more cynical nature of the ending we got. It shows that in the end, Dr. Everett was right about basically everything he said, and even though Amy was pure and always had good intentions, she still couldn't save anyone, not even herself. And Dr. Everett just goes back to his normal routine, having to live more bad thoughts in his head about humans. So yeah, overall this episode was really great. I don't think it's as good as the previous 2 episodes, but I still like it a lot. I'd love to see Dr. Everett come back, although I'm not entirely sure how they do it, unless he finally does decide to change after being haunted by his mistakes and Amy and all that, or if they just have someone else show up and repeat the story, or, this one's the best one, maybe a bad group comes in, kills all the walkers, forcing him to leave before he's next, and then he joins some group out of necessity and he learns how to give in to humanity again. That last one could actually be cool, honestly. But anyway, I'd give this episode an 8 out of 10. On to episode 5, Davon, which aside from being the prettiest episode so far, doesn't really have much going for it. Now honestly, this video is already really long, so I'm gonna keep my thoughts on this episode very brief. Throughout the episode, they try to build up the mystery of what happened to our main character. He woke up next to a dead body in the forest and spends most of the runtime regaining his memories. It's also set in some pilgrim type village, which is unique, but this episode really disappointed me. Throughout the episode, I found myself thoroughly bored. I was very uninterested with the story, though I am always looking to understand what happened, so I was trying my best. But I could hardly understand about half of what they were trying to convey with the mystery, and it was all just very boring. I did not enjoy this episode almost at all, and that's really all I have to say. After writing off of 3 really good episodes, I was expecting a lot more. I'd give it a 2 out of 10. For the final episode in the series, we have Doña, which has its 2 protagonists, Idalia and Eric, go into what is basically a haunted house. So these 2 are together and they're in a forest until Idalia brings up that she knows a place nearby. So they go into a house. It's pretty creepy, but they meet an old lady who refuses to let them spend the night, and Eric tries to force her to let them stay, only for her to have a heart attack. She dies, and from there, the couple starts to have hallucinations, starting with Idalia, and later Eric as well. This causes them to turn on each other until the hallucinations warp their minds so much that they kill each other. They die in the basement with a bunch of walkers stuck in vines, and they end up stuck too, as they die. So let's go ahead and discuss the positives of this episode, and I know I really went quick on this one, but like I said, this video is already really long, and there's just not that much to say for some of these. I really liked the score. The music was just very good in this episode, and I didn't really notice it much in the other ones, so it's nice that this one's score stood out. I loved the acting most of the time. We got to see these really cool scenes where the characters get into arguments, scream at each other, break stuff, and all that. I love when that type of stuff is pulled off well. It's really good. The CGI for some of the hallucinations was also good, which is cool given the track record The Walking Dead has for CGI. As for the concept, it's semi-interesting, delving into more supernatural stuff like episode 2, but it felt more like Evil Dead than The Walking Dead, so that can be seen as both a positive and a negative depending on who you are. Now that we're on to the negatives, I'll just start. I found this episode to be like the 5th episode in that it was kinda boring. Like a haunted house type thing is just really basic already, but to basically replace the aspects that make The Walking Dead interesting with the haunted house stuff, I'm not sure. I think episode 2 did work really well because while it did veer off into more crazy stuff than the franchise is usually known for, none of it shunned or took away from the concepts in the main show. So like the issue with the Walker outbreak is at the forefront. Whereas in this episode, there's one Walker that Adalia kills off screen, one that she has a hallucination of, and the rest are in the ending, but they're tied up in vines. They might have killed some at the beginning, but I don't remember and I can't be asked to go rewatch. Most of this episode is just spent in the house with hallucinations, so it didn't really feel like The Walking Dead. They try to make Eric somewhat of a bad guy in this episode as well, and I see it for the most part, but he's not a horrible dude. Yet after Adalia comforts him and the two go to bed together, she gets a hallucination and tells him, and he says, "You saw what?" And then she's like, "Nothing, is that what you want to hear?" Like, bro, he didn't even do anything, he just asked. Bro is confused. But yeah, other than that, there really wasn't much substance in this episode, and to me, it just felt like a better version of episode 5. I know the actual plot is way different, but the tone and general feel for me was pretty similar. So I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. Pretty mid. So yeah guys, that has been my review of Tales of the Walking Dead, and man, you can just see how different these episodes are. We've got 2 10 out of 10s, 1 8 out of 10, a 5, a 3, and a 2. The variety is actually insane. Basically, half the show is amazing and half of it was very bad. I don't think it makes much sense to rate the entire show, but I did the math anyway because I'm like that. And it'd be like a 4.8 out of 10 if you just add and divide them to get the average. I felt like this show really shined in some of these episodes and has great potential to do better if they get renewed for a second season. And I obviously wouldn't mind continuing the stories of episode 2, 3, and 4. But I'm not sure if they only want to do one-off stories or not. It seemed like they were kind of building up to a crossing paths of the main characters as episodes 1 and 2 both end with our protagonist in a back view walking down a road. I know it's not the same road, but symbolism and stuff. And that was my initial theory, but the later episodes did that, so that's probably not true anymore. But anyway, this video is so long, so I'm just going to close it off now. What did you guys think of the show? Did you agree with what I had to say? Are you going to give another episode another look after this? I'm curious for your thoughts. But as always, tell me if you liked this video, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.